Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, 3-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Welcome to our show, No Instructions, where we're actually interviewing here Kristy. And Kristy's currently at Pelion Partners, and we're going to hear a little bit about her story. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Chad.
Awesome. So this is going to be an interesting discussion because you've had a startup, you built a startup and had that experience and sold it, exited that some time ago and have kind of taken a different career path. So it's going to be cool to talk about that today. But tell us a little bit about your business and give us, take us like into the past, like, what that business was and what problem you were solving.
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. So the problem I was solving, I'm a mom of 3 daughters, and back like a decade ago, STEAM, which I think probably most people listening will know what that is, science, technology, engineering, math. The A stands for arts, and some people like to add that in. But a decade ago, that wasn't something that was mainstream. And my oldest daughter was asking for things like playing Minecraft on a Raspberry Pi. And if you don't know, it's not something you eat. It's a little PCB printed circuit board that you can do tons of different things with. And so, my background is in music, the arts, but I didn't have a technical background. And so as a parent, I was trying to help a child that was, asking really technical questions about things that I was learning. In school, there weren't programs that were helping.
How old was she at the time?
She would have been, starting from the time she was like 2 and 3, she was asking for this stuff. So I think at that point, she was probably about 8. 6, 7, 8, around there. That was kind of a wide range, 6, 7, 8. It's a sliding scale.
Yeah, no, it's good.
And so I came up with the idea that I wanted to I wanted to gamify learning for her. And so ended up inventing a hackable Frisbee. And it was a programmable, hackable toy that taught coding pre-K through 12. Wow. And so there was a little printed circuit board that snapped into the Frisbee. It had everything, like you could stack an accelerometer, which, you can measure velocity and different things with the Frisbee as you throw it. There were some LED lights, a buzzer. You could do music with it, light art, just a really fun toy to give kids, push the buttons, break some things and learn how to program.
You could essentially push functions into this toy to get it to do things.
So then you would connect it to a computer. We were some of the first partners with MIT Labs for Scratch extensions, the drag and drop code blocks. And through either command line, C coding language, or ScratchX, a child or a student could come in and program the Frisbee to do all sorts of things.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So about what year is this that you started having this idea?
Like 2014, about.
So it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
There was a lot, like in ed tech in particular with like coding, and we've seen coding boot camps, Kaylin Sharp with Dev Mountain, and a lot of cool stuff happening. But back then it was that'd be pretty innovative, especially for a child.
I do think it was a little bit ahead of its time.
It probably was.
But yeah, it was kind of right before. It was shortly thereafter that you had like Mo Reeder, who was doing his coding school. You had Tyler Richards, popped, and there's a few different people here in Utah that ended up doing coding camps. You got Trina, who's doing Code Moms now. So really incredible to see the progress for learning and education that is available now.
Yeah, definitely. Even mainstream, I think University of Utah has a pretty good, boot camp now.
They do.
Right?
Yep. Yeah.
It's just very, very interesting and very different than how they would be used to doing it.
It's a trade.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It is.
That anybody could learn.
Yeah, the problem with, this may be a little off track, but the problem with, traditional education as it relates to really technical roles is that, there's too many lagging indicators, right? By the time we learn that, some technology is important, by the time it gets published in a book, and then matriculated, like it's 3, 4, 5 years old now.
Exactly. No, we don't even know. Even right now, we don't know what the jobs are going to be in the next 10 years. You look at the advancement of like AI, ML. You even look at what, smart cars, or, Elon Musk, the Boring Company, Tesla, invented new jobs, new technologies, Absolutely. Like new skill sets. And I think it's pretty cool. Yeah.
What's going to be interesting also is like how the future might adjust. We're seeing a heavy push in software engineering and software building, but I wonder how much more will interface with hardware, like what that balance might be. Like early on, it was very heavy hardware, right? Low software. Now we're seeing more software. Like I wonder what will happen with hardware, right? Like we're kind of simplifying our lives more and more. We ditch the camera. We ditch, I wore an Apple Watch for a long time, but then I got kind of sick of it, so I don't anymore. But like, I wonder, what do you think will happen?
I think it's the classic bundling and unbundling that you see repeated throughout history. I think that we'll get to a point where I think we're seeing it, where there are elements of hardware that are becoming critical, then they'll kind of become antiquated. We'll unbundle that. I think it's the cycle of innovation, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think that we'll see that forever.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to 2014.
Okay. 2014.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, what are you doing for work at the time? What does your life look like?
So I had done door-to-door summer sales for a really long time.
What'd you sell?
Security systems, security systems, and managed some summer offices. And then I also at that point had my two daughters, and I was pregnant with my third. And so I also was doing odd and end work. So I was managing like the marketing at a law office, and just doing a lot of different odd and end things to make ends meet.
And so you had 2 children at the time?
2 children, and then I was pregnant with my youngest, Goldie.
Wow.
And I think too at that time, and it's really hard. I mentioned this in the beginning when we kind of were chatting, but it's hard for me to talk about my professional life without talking about my personal life, because so much of my personal life has predicated my professional life. And I think at that point when I was pregnant, like I was realizing that, my marriage, and there were things that were just not working.
Yeah.
And was seeing that I needed to figure out a way to provide a good life for my girls and I.
And how old were you at the time in 2014?
I was young. I would have been like 29, I think.
Yeah.
And so like I think I had on the back of my mind, like, I need to figure something out.
Yeah.
And then when, Kinsey was asking about coding stuff, and I realized there was a gap in the market, I did a ton of research and realized there was nobody solving for this. I had a brother who ended up being my co-founder. He was kind of in the startup world, and he was like, you should do this. You could do this.
This was Kyle.
Right? Yeah. And you know Kyle.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. He's if there's one person I probably owe the most to in this life, it's my brother Kyle. Mm. Yeah. And
So your older brother, younger brother?
Older.
Yeah.
If you ask him, he will say that he's 3 years older. If you ask me, I'll say 2. I think we've definitively agreed on like 2.5. But
awesome.
Yeah, he was the one that encouraged me to go for it, and so I dug into research every competitor, every toy on the market, just even trends in education and what was happening there. Just started networking, building my ideas, got a technical co-founder, and yeah.
And how'd you come up with the name?
Fuse Play. I wanted to fuse play with learning.
Cool.
And so that was Fuse Play.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So I actually, in my past, so I had met you at some event. I can't remember even what it was, but it was somewhere in Salt Lake, and you had purple hair.
I did.
And that's why I remembered you like years later, because after I sold Jump, and then and then the pandemic happened, I like stopped going to events and stuff for like a year and a half or 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny to see you. I was like, I think that's the girl with purple hair.
That was the girl with purple hair. Yeah. People remembered the purple hair.
It's good marketing.
Yeah. Sometimes it was purple, sometimes it was pink, sometimes blue, but
That's awesome.
It was fun.
Yeah. Okay. So you start assembling a team really and saying, hey, brother Kyle, What do you think? And he says, this might be real, but looking at, as the early days of Fuse Play and what like could become a business at some point, how did that feel? Because you're describing also a lot of personal changes, maybe potentially divorce, and, you've got 3 children, or one on the way, right? 2 children, one on the way. That's a lot of life changes. Like, how are you thinking about that? Did it feel like something you had to do and you knew it was gonna be hard, or did you feel like excited to do it, or how'd you feel about that?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think that if you were to talk to any founder or somebody who has taken the path of entrepreneur, there is something fundamentally different about us.
Yeah.
Where we sort of thrive and love like the challenge, the chaos, the pressure. Like we do well in that, And so I think that, I think fundamentally like nature versus nurture, like was it this or was it that? I think it's all of it. I think that life is so nuanced and we can't always just, be polarized and like it was this or that. For me, like I think it was a combination of everything. Yeah. How did it feel though? I felt alive. I felt excited, like you have that fire, where you just feel passionately about something and want to build something incredible that you love. And so I think for me, and on the personal side, actually within a year of that, I did end up filing for divorce and took my girls. And long story short, overnight became a full-time single mom with full financial, physical responsibility of my girls. Wow. And their dad actually has since passed away, which I wish it was different. But it's been a hard journey to navigate personally and professionally alongside that. And like, so yes, I think a lot of my personal life, when it's, you don't have a choice but to like put food on the table, like, man, you get food on the table, like you figure it out. I also think that just who I am innately, like it's hard to talk about if that wasn't my life, because it is, but I think I also just naturally, I'm an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Yeah. That was another question I was going to ask you is like, have you always felt that way? Like, did you always, look at problems to be solved? Like, did you feel like you would be an entrepreneur or felt compelled to that at some point?
So I don't think that I knew to put the name to it.
Yeah.
So I actually am a classically trained concert pianist. And so I
didn't know that.
Yeah. And so I think that like when you think about what it takes to learn and memorize like 2 to 3 hours of repertoire for, a competition or a performance, like the discipline, the dedication, like again, there's got to be a chip like a little bit different in you to have a desire at like, 14 years old to sit and do that.
You're weird. Yeah. What you're saying. I'm weird.
Yeah, we're weirdos.
For sure. So do you still play?
I do. For fun
so.
though. Like, and for fun. This morning, have you listened to John Baptiste?
Okay. I feel like I have.
Okay. I'm
going to Google it right after.
I think he's one of the most incredible, impressive modern day musicians.
Okay.
Most talented, just played at Jazz Fest. But I've been learning, he has his own version of Blackbird by the Beatles on the piano. And so actually this morning, like that's early this morning, I wake the whole house up. They love it sometimes and sometimes they don't. But yeah, I've been working on that.
So my dad, I'm probably the least talented of all my siblings, but we all to some ability have some musical ability. But my siblings are amazing. They'll get together and do like jam sessions on all sorts of instruments.
That's awesome.
My dad was a professional drummer and, played for USC, later BYU, which is a whole other funny story. But like he grew up, in California and Santa Monica. And he played like in every way. And his first job outside of college was a music teacher. So
that's incredible.
We grew up, we still have his drums that he got when he was like 8 years old when he was learning.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Do you think that's impacted you growing up with kind of music like that?
I have a friend actually who's a very successful entrepreneur, and he tells me, I don't have time to listen to music. He literally says this. It's so funny. And I'm like, how do you not have time to listen to music? Like it brings something out of you.
Yeah.
I love music.
Yeah. Creation.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's really not the same, even if you're using the same notes. Like it's different in every way, however you splice out. I mean, most rock music uses like the same 3, 4, 5 notes.
It does, yeah. I think that's honestly like full circle though to the question you asked me, like creation, pattern recognition to like even you saying those few notes that are the same. Like I didn't know I was an entrepreneur, and I think I was probably the most surprised out of everybody. But like once I did it, I was like, oh, this fits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting parallel.
Yeah.
It's like hyper creative, but still like for me as an entrepreneur, it's like everyone jokes and says, oh, it's about the money. And for many, it can't be about the money. There's many unsuccessful entrepreneurs, but like you usually make a lot less money being an entrepreneur. But like it truly is about freedom to create, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a different kind of freedom, right? Because, you know, you still might have to get on a call you don't want to get on with a customer, or, you know, you still have a boss, I guess, in some sense, but like the freedom to problem solve and go find problems.
Which is where I think the discipline becomes so important, because if you don't have the discipline to execute and drive something like with that freedom, I think that's why a lot of people don't, you know, they don't ultimately like get anywhere. Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
So looking back at Fuse Play, so your brother says, yeah, I want to do this. Like describe those early days. Do you pitch to him and this technical co-founder or early leader? Like, what do you pitch to them? Like, hey, let's moonlight this for a while. I don't really have money yet, but we'll find it. Like how did you put that together?
Yep. So I think that this is where like I really benefited from having my brother who had done this before. And he approached it very much from a mentorship point of view. He was my co-founder and he did a lot to drive the business. But whereas like he taught me how to fish. Like he wasn't there like doing stuff for me. I pitched him an idea and he was like, great, go research it. Like this is the next step, go do it and like come back and let's talk. Yeah. And so it was, I think every step of the way, like I did the research. He was like, great, now like what do you want to build? Go ideate. And I was like, okay. So I went and ideated. Then he's like, great, go validate. So I went into like Harmon's and I would talk to random families and like moms with kids and, you know, like got people's opinions and thoughts.
When you did that at that point, kid, this is really cool.
Yeah.
Because these are things like little tidbits that like you just don't hear very often unless you talk for a long time with a founder directly. Like we're talking about the real hard shit.
Real hard shit. Yeah, no, it's true.
So like I had one guest on, I guess I can out him. He'll be fine. This episode will come after, but Brandon from Client Book. Sweet. And they had a point where if they didn't figure it out in the next few months, they were done.
Yeah.
And him and his co-founder, who are not typical salespeople, went door to door pre-selling contracts.
Yeah.
One, so they could get revenue, but the most important thing is they could figure out what to build in the next 60 days.
Yep.
Like powerful. So like, did you go with a prototype? Did you go asking questions? Was this pre-prototype?
So the Harmons in City Creek became like my like office and
awesome.
Also my proving ground. So at first I didn't have a prototype and I would just talk to people. I would talk to educators. I would talk to other moms. I would talk to kids. I obviously worked a lot with my own kids. And then once we did have a prototype, got to the point of having a working prototype, I would bring the prototype to Harmons. I actually ended up meeting the wife of the founder of Master Control, or is it it's the security company? Which was really one of the first innovators. He was the CTO, Eric Smith, and she connected me with him, but she was in Harmon's with her kids and they had a bunch of kids. So I was like, hey, will you come test this out? And she was like, this is amazing. Like, you know, my husband's super technical and the kids loved it. And so you have weird stories like that where, but you do it enough, like you get enough shots on goal, like you're gonna land something. Yeah.
That's really cool. Like that's what separates it, right? You know, you hear all these people with these ideas, but they don't go do something.
Gotta do it.
And that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
What do you think it is for, what could you tell founders, you know, or even pre-founders, entrepreneurs, so we could even call them, like what can you do to actually get started? Are there some things that you can elicit to actually like get those first steps done?
Yeah, I love that question. One thing I've been thinking about lately is I've been thinking about future builders. You know, now that I'm in venture capital, the founders that exist now that are building incredible startups, even though I might know them as an operator or a founder, typically they're going to want to go to like the main partner to like share what they're building. So one thing I've been thinking about strategically for myself is like, how can I get traction with people to like get deals, right? Because that also is like my lifeblood right now.
Right.
I know this is sort of a tangent, but go with me on this.
No, we're doing it.
Because your question is a really good one, and it's one I've been thinking about that's in line with kind of personally what I'm working on right now. And one of the thoughts I've had is that there are so many people that aren't founders yet that were like me.
Yeah.
That like are builders, you know, maybe they're like mid-management, director level people right now, whether in a startup or, you know, an enterprise level type of business, but they have a desire for more. Yeah. And I've been thinking about how I can build relationships with those people and champion those people and help them like progress.
It's the long play.
Yeah. And exactly. It's the long play. Yeah, it always is. And I've been thinking about how I did it and how I could help those people. And one of the things I've been thinking about is just the power of simply showing up and starting. Like just putting in research, pick a research project once a quarter where you want to learn about something interesting that is a problem that you've been thinking about, and, you know, do a research paper that's for your own sole purpose. Maybe you do something with it, maybe you don't, but like it gives you opportunity to reach out to people, to network with people, to understand deeper a problem that you're curious about. When I look back at like I actually just the other day was looking through my pictures. Do you ever go through like your pictures and just go through history?
Yeah, totally.
Sometimes it's embarrassing. I'm like, what was I thinking? That was crap, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Whether like the project or like what I was outputting, but like you have to start.
Totally.
And so I think that's the advice I would give to people that are, you know, maybe they're not builders yet, but they have that entrepreneurial fire and they're trying to figure it out. Just start. Like pick something to research, like reach out to someone, just start.
Totally. And you know, the funny thing about it is that so many people get hesitant, at least from people I've had discussions with, because people reach out to me, how do I start this business or where do I get started? And a lot of them have like decision paralysis around what am I going to do, right? Because in order to decide what you're going to do, you have to decide what you're not going to do. You have to say no to a bunch of things. And I think that's really hard for people. But the irony is that the first thing you're going to do isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Right? Like even if it's the same business, you're going to pivot at least 50% in some way.
Talk to me about like the decision paralysis of saying no versus yes, because I think that's actually really interesting.
Well, okay, now other tangent getting into the venture space, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper in a sec too. But I had an investor invested in my last startup, and he said to me that his mentor told him, if you're going to be an investor, right, an institutional investor, you know, just like you represent, your job is to say no. You're going to make your career is made or broken on 10 to 15 decisions, real decisions.
Yeah.
Like that's powerful when you put it in that perspective. And I think for people going out to fundraise, understanding that you're talking to people that are trained to say no in a lot of ways, right? To get to a good yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It is interesting. What is interesting about that is that as a founder, and this is another interesting conversation because people might have different beliefs, but I said yes to everything when I was first starting until I was able to kind of narrow down and figure out, you know, what really would be valuable. But sometimes you almost, when you're just starting, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so I would say yes to everything just to figure it out until I got to a point where, one, I had a big enough network, and two, I had enough, you know, understanding of what I was trying to create to be able to say no.
Yeah.
So I said yes to everything. But you're right. On the investment side, it's totally opposite. It's a totally different way of thinking. It's a different muscle. Yeah.
Yeah, it's unique. Like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. So I want to, before we you know go away from Fuse Play and start talking about investment, tell me about like the point you go into these stores and you start, you know, getting feedback, and then you start going back with prototyping. You had a software component, correct? And a hardware component.
Correct.
How did you prototype the hardware?
So we worked with different manufacturing plants in Shenzhen.
Okay.
And we did look at sourcing different things in the United States, but like from a cost perspective, it was just, bootstrap startup
Totally.
at that point wasn't reasonable for us. And so we created different CAD files, and, I would sit with who ultimately became one of our third co-founders, Ron Madsen. He was a CTO, and I would sit with him and I would tell him what I wanted and what I was envisioning, and he, from a technical point of view, would explain to me why that would or wouldn't work and other solutions. And we started getting a bunch of prototypes, and then we would bring them to events. I went to a lot of school events. The STEM Action Center worked a lot up on Capitol Hill with different things they were doing. Girl Scouts of America was actually our first big partner that we landed.
That's cool.
And then there were a lot of programs that big tech have for education for kids. Mm-hmm. And so we started partnering a lot with Intel was one of our big partners. Domo was one of our partners for a time for different social impact projects they had. So that was kind of how we got our start.
Was there a recurring revenue sort of like SaaSified model to it, or was it a one and done product?
Yeah. So it was a one and done product, and it's funny, hindsight, I look at it now knowing what I know in investing, and I'm like, that was a stupid idea.
You could have easily subscribed to that.
Exactly. Because we did have like a curriculum,
right.
And there was a software component, but again, like, you got to start somewhere.
For sure.
You got to start somewhere. And so, over the course of about 5 years, within the first year we launched a Kickstarter, it failed. Consumers weren't interested. From that came the partnership with the Girl Scouts of America, who saw the Kickstarter and reached out. From the partnership with the Girl Scouts came the partnership with Intel. And that's where we realized into education is really where we had the opportunity to sell. So then Girl Scouts and Intel started introducing us to different school districts that they were connected with. And from there, we started getting like mass orders from the school districts in Texas, Australia, the United States.
Okay, so we're gonna get into this orders. That's really exciting. Okay, before you got orders, did you convince everybody to work for free at night, or did you raise money?
So we were bootstrapped.
Okay.
We did eventually raise a small convertible note.
Cool.
And it was sweat equity. Like, none of us were
really. Let's talk
really.
about a convertible note real quick. Could you let everyone know what a convertible note is? Because I think there's probably a good chunk of people that actually don't know.
Yeah. So a convertible note is essentially like people are willing to give you $100,000. Typically, it's a pretty small amount of money, a few $100,000. And upon the point of like an acquisition, that money would convert into equity or some sort of payout for whoever gave that money.
Right.
And so for us, I'll be transparent, the note did never convert. We did self-use play, and we did pay back money, but there was never the conversion that you would
of actual equity.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fine for investors. It's
Correct.
totally fine,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And a convertible note often should carry interest. Now safes are a little different, but it's just another vehicle for early startups to raise capital when you can't quite price the business yet.
Exactly.
But that's great. So that was a vehicle to get started. And so, at what point was this? Was this pre-revenue, or was this about the time you started getting orders?
So we started, I think one thing that's really important is to start collecting $1 as soon as you can.
Yeah.
So we didn't have any sort of meaningful revenue, but it was, so technically I probably should say it was pre-revenue, though we were collecting a few bucks for different things we were doing. And pitched the idea to a lot of friends, a few different family members, and we raised, just a really small convertible note that was just enough to get us to manufacturing the molds for the Frisbee and the prototypes.
Yeah.
And then once we started getting orders in, that's when we were able to fulfill
that must have been pretty intense too, because, for people that don't know, when you're creating a mold has a lifespan on it, and they're pretty expensive. They're very expensive.
Hardware's hard.
Yeah. And so you're only going to get so much out of that, and you can't sell a mold. So you can only sell the product, and then you have to purchase a minimum product order.
Yep.
And so you're basically saying, all right, let's go take some risk and buy a bunch of product.
And then you got to figure out how you're going to assemble the product and the different pieces, which a lot of times, if you're trying to be cost effective, doesn't happen in the same factories. And then you have packaging, which again, if you're like, some big enterprise, like wham, bam, you can have it done in one factory. But for bootstrap founders, it was piecemealed.
Yeah, for sure. That must have been stressful.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I learned a ton, Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So, so if I remember right, it was pretty quick, right? So at the point you start getting orders, what happened?
So what
was the next step?
Yeah. So after we started getting orders, that's when we decided we were ready to go out and raise a seed round.
Yeah.
And so we did. We went out and had kicked off early conversations with, a lot of different investors. And that is also, again, personal and professional when my life sort of imploded. And at that point, there were some pretty significant things that happened that made me overnight full-time single mom with full financial, physical responsibility of my girls. And really changed the trajectory of everything, which when you're in conversations with investors, I think as founders, especially a first-time founder, oftentimes you look at those investors as like God.
Yeah.
It's like they're successful, they're powerful, and it was really scary to go and tell them kind of what was happening, because you also need to be, there's a, fiduciary responsibility like on both ends to be transparent. And so had to be honest about what was happening and realistic with myself if I was going to be able to continue the startup grind. And so that is exciting. Things started, and also some things pretty quickly ended at that point. So
you're going through the process of divorce, essentially, right? Did you have to deal with any? Well, backtracking just a little bit, like, I'm sure things were a little dicey and rocky in your relationship, but did you feel any support in doing this? While you were still married? From your ex-husband? I think that he supported as best as he was able to. I think that like he was in a pretty tough place himself and trying to figure that out. And I think that when I feel really passionate that as humans, there's a wonderful book, Martha Beck, The Way of Integrity. I feel really passionate about people living authentically for themselves. I think oftentimes we're taught, especially in certain cultures, that that's like selfish to think of yourself and like your needs and like what your happiness means and what will bring that happiness. But I feel really passionately that people just have to go and live an authentic, honest life and do what makes them happy, and that's what I decided to do. Yeah, that's cool. So what did that mean for you in the future? What were you going to do next? Did it mean, hey, let's get in talks with some of this early traction? I mean, you have legit partnerships going, right? And like you have sales. There's a business here. Yeah. So, you're at this crossroad of this personal life. Like, I got to take care of my girls, or I got to do this or that. And this early on in the startup, even if you had raised money back then, you probably were only going to get a salary of $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. That's not very much money when you're by yourself with kids. Yeah. So, and I should say too, I'll add, like, without saying too much, out of respect to everybody, like, and the girl's dad ultimately passed away, and like the situation, like it was bad. Like it was not just like your typical like divorce. Yeah. And so I think to your point of like thinking about what a future salary would look like, the sales, the impact to my girls, how hard I'd be working. Yep. When you think about what all of that takes and like the value it would bring, I had to be really honest with myself about just like putting food on the table, taking care of my own emotional well-being, the well-being of my girls. And I think there was probably about like 3 months where I really thought a lot about everything, and ultimately went to my brother, Kyle, and said that we probably needed to start looking at an exit strategy for me and talk about what that would mean for the company. Yeah. What did he say? That was tough. I mean, it's hard. Yeah. I think that I'm fortunate to have had a co-founder where we understand each other really well, and there's a lot of mutual respect and empathy, and we both hustled really hard. And like, I don't know, when you've gone to the ends of the earth with each other, like, and you get to that point where like you both know that
it's not going to move forward the same way.
Yeah.
It's hard. It was sad. It was hard.
Did you, so when I sold my business in 2019, and, maybe I'll do a podcast episode about that, because it also has its nitty gritty shit. Like everyone, the hard thing is like everyone, pats you on the back because they don't know any of the details. Everyone pats you on the back is like, oh, good job.
It's
and
messy.
You're like, it was the worst thing
messy.
ever.
It's messy. And I look back at it and I don't regret any of it.
Yeah.
Like it is what I owe my life to.
Yeah.
It's like getting 10 MBAs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But it's hard.
It's super hard.
It's hard.
And the hard, I think like the traumatic impact for me was that because there were some things we did really well and there were some things we didn't do very well, and which is great for my distro and future business because I got to play and practice with other money, right? Yeah. So now it's more efficient. But I think one of the most traumatic internal things for me in selling the business was that I was the business, at least for me, like internally. I didn't see myself without it. And I used to make fun of people that'd be like, oh, your business is your baby. I'm like, no, it's not. I'll sell it, But then when it really came down to it, like my closest friends, I spent more time with those people than my wife, right? Customers, when you're building and running a startup, like it is your life.
It's your identity.
Like literally, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's weird. So selling that or moving on from it, whatever you want to call it, for however it is for anyone, it almost feels like it strips a part of you.
Yeah.
That's weird.
I actually, so after I was divorced, dated a gentleman, tremendous amount of respect for this guy, successful, smart. And he told me, because I was struggling with this exact thing you're talking about, where like my career was changing and I was like, who am I?
Yeah, totally.
And he made the comment to me, you should never be codependent on your career. And it was such an interesting way to phrase it. But I think just realizing that that doesn't identify you and you don't identify that. And even though it becomes such an enmeshed part of your life, realizing that you are what built that, and moving forward, everything that created that still exists within you and you can bring that wherever you go. Yeah. For whatever reason, that really helped me kind of have a better relationship with my identity with and my career. Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. There's a whole other conversation about just the trauma of running a company. And, we probably have a long conversation as an investor. How do you support founders? Because founders are kind of crazy. We talked about this. We're weirdos.
Yeah.
And, I think it's important to take breaks. But back to you. So you guys sell this business at some point, right? You exit this business.
We do. Haven't issued, actually one issued patent, another one that's pending that'll likely go through here shortly.
Still?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, patents are that's another it's a long journey. But yeah, exited the startup, sold it to a gentleman. Product is still being sold and used today in education, which is really cool.
That's cool.
And worked at Degreed after that. It was a growth startup here locally. I was worked product operations, special projects, client advisory. Did work with the founder CEO there.
Awesome.
In that process, I worked on a board for the founder of Degreed, and I met a gentleman that was head of strategy at Instructure, and he was like, hey, some interesting things are happening. You should check it out.
Yeah.
And that's actually what landed me at Instructure, which I think that was really a pivotal moment in my career. I was hired to manage the divestiture and acquisition of Bridge, which was a sub company of Instructure, similar to Canvas. And in that process, was reporting to Thoma Bravo, and also identified that there were some pretty significant data discrepancies, and so was told to fix it, which I did. And then I was promoted to vice president of global customer experience and had a department of about 70 people across 5 different countries, managing tens of millions in revenue. And we sold to a private equity firm based out of the UK, Learning Technologies Group. They brought me on full time, and I continued to expand. And
so the acquiring company actually hired you in
full time, yeah. So then I was managing all post sales functions, so everything from technical support, account management, renewals, professional services, and customer success.
Wow.
Globally for multiple business units.
Do you
within
feel,
a department?
How do you balance? Because I can I can see definitely that you have a creative brain. I mean, if you were good at piano, you definitely can handle product management and building product, but also it seems like you have a good understanding of operations. Where do you tend to side? Like, do you have an ops brain, or do you have that kind of entrepreneurial creative brain, or both? Or how do you manage
both,
that?
which has been really cool to realize.
Yeah.
And so honestly, if you look and I love customer experience, like all of the post-sales functions that I've managed, it really takes all of those. And even if you look at like a CEO or any senior executive at like a large enterprise level, you have to be able to liaise with product, technical, engineering. You have to be able to liaise with the customer. You have to be able to interface like sales, account management, like renewals. And when you are owning revenue and your responsibility post-sales is growing that revenue, which mine was, like you really have to be creative, you have to be operational, and you have to be technical. I think that the best leaders in those positions that I've met, like they have all of those skills.
So tell me a little bit about like going from building a business as an entrepreneur and getting to that point at Instructure where you're managing a lot. Do you feel like that was scratching the itch that you had as an entrepreneur, or did you feel like, maybe I want to get back to that at some point, or maybe I want to try something else? Like how are you feeling at that point?
Yeah, I think that I think that most entrepreneurs, we are curious people.
Yeah.
We love learning. We love solving hard problems. And man, working in private equity is no joke. We did like multiple M&A transactions with the other private equity firm I worked with. And so it definitely, I think also a lot of it depends on the team. Like my manager, I had autonomy. Like he was there to remove blockers and like help me. So I still was very much working in that free flow. There was high trust, high collaboration. Like it had all of the key elements that you would also experience as an entrepreneur. And it was like a little bit cushy, which was nice.
yeah, totally.
I had a paycheck.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Especially still a single mom at that point, right? Yeah. Like, you did get married again.
I did just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Cool. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Marrying someone awesome is the best.
It really makes all the difference in the world.
Difference.
He's incredible.
Yeah. Super, super cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk with a little bit of time that we have left. Like, how'd you get introduced to Pelion? And I mean, that's a very interesting, it's not super different from what you're doing in private equity maybe, but like, going from an entrepreneur to an investor now, like how is that? And, what are you enjoying about it?
Yeah. Entrepreneur to senior executive operations, private equity to investor, very different. Every single one of them. So how it came about, so a little bit about Pelion. Pelion Venture Partners is the oldest, largest early stage venture fund in the state of Utah. We've been around since 1986, currently investing out of Fund 7. And we actually are just at the tail end of raising Fund 8, which is about a $400 million fund.
It's pretty large for earlier stage.
It's a big fund, yeah. And we will start deploying that at the end of this year. SaaS generalists, Cloudflare was an early investment. Divvy is a more recent notable one. But most companies in Utah, Lucid, Divvy, you name it, like Pelion has likely been one of the backers.
The Pelion has done very well, especially in the last few funds, right?
Yeah.
Very notable companies that non-Utah people would recognize that they invested in. For
yeah.
Sure.
Yep. And so they actually reached out to me last fall, and they had asked a local entrepreneur who's exited and had some wins for recommendations. And I'm sure this person gave multiple names. I was just one name on the list, and they reached out, and I don't know. I wasn't super. I was
and
like,
you
whatever.
Your head and was like,
I was pretty happy. Like,
yeah, for sure.
And it kind of had been a dream that I had wanted a long time ago, but it's so hard to get into venture that I kind of wrote it off. And there comes a point where you have your path and it's going well, and like you don't rock that boat.
Yeah.
Especially after what I had been through. And so, but I continued to meet with the team and just I was continually impressed with who they were, their dedication just to managing the fund. I don't think that there's better wealth managers. Like, they're phenomenal with how they manage money and just the discipline to their investment. And they ended up making me an offer. I accepted and started last fall, and I'm about a year in now.
Yeah.
So
that's really awesome. And what's cool about the venture space too is that everyone, eats together, right? Like as they put a fund together, when the fund wins, everyone wins.
It is true.
You know?
It still is competitive though. Like when the fund wins, everyone wins. At the same time though, like, again, going back to like the entrepreneur mentality, like it is actually very similar to being an entrepreneur. We have to fundraise. We have to go source deals.
Absolutely.
Like, we have to network, business development. Like, you really are doing a lot of the same things. But it is, to your point, when one person wins, everybody wins, and that's really cool.
Yeah, and as an investor, you get to participate on the upside, right? Like, and so what's interesting about being an investor is, although it's a little bit more administrative and a little bit different, and you also get in and grind with, at times with founders, but you get to participate in the ownership, right? Both in the win, like not just monetarily, but like in the losses and in the gains, And so it can be really powerful as an investor to be seeing what's going on at a board level, like what is actually happening in the business, monthly, quarterly, and that could be really, really powerful. I think
it's, I think if there were myths that I could debunk about venture capital, I think the first one from the outside, or at least my outside perspective that I had, venture capital was like very glamorous. It's hard. Yeah. And you're taking out the trash. Like, everybody is wearing all of the hats all of the time. Doesn't matter if there's a spreadsheet, a deck, something administrative that needs to get done. Like, doesn't matter if you've been like the president of the United States. Like, you're doing that work too.
Yeah.
And then to your point, why I joined venture and the perspective I wanted to bring was my experience to help. So like, when those, in those board meetings, if there is struggle or they're figuring out how to navigate scale or seismic change or churn, or just being there and saying, hey, like, here if you want a perspective, here to help if you want it. If not, great. But I'm a helper.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
And have you done your first deal yet?
I did. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's not announced yet.
Cool.
Should be shortly, but incredible company, local founder. We did the deal last year, and really excited about what they're doing. And
that's cool. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It takes working through deals and doing deals again. I talked about this earlier. You say no a lot.
Yeah.
You see a lot of deals, but you really only have to do a few a year that are really good to be very successful.
Yeah.
So that's really awesome.
And I would say too, like, it really helps to have, when I say I did my own deal, like, I'm still so new at this that like, I'm handheld through it. Very much, venture is very much a mentorship business. And so, a lot of it is like, whether they're incoming deals or source deals, like, you are working very closely with other team members and the partners, and they're teaching me everything that they've learned and they know. And so, like, did I do a deal? Yes. But like,
who's taken you under their wing? Who's really mentored you over there?
So we have a mentorship program where we rotate. My first mentor was Chad Packard.
Cool.
And I felt bad. He was at Disneyland with his family. It was a Sunday when this deal was like, I was trying to do all the legal paperwork, which I'd never done anything like that before, understanding the terms, like the board structure. And he was like, I think he was outside the Pirates of the Caribbean line or something. And his wife had to she was like yelling for him. And he was, he was
patient.
Yeah. It was very, very generous of him. It's a great team though.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Well, I'm happy for you. It sounds like the last decade has brought you a lot of different experiences, and it seems like you're in a good place right now. Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see what the next 5 years or so looks like for you in venture capital.
I think if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life is not a linear path. And I don't know what it'll look like either, but I think what I do know is, like, I feel confident with the lessons I've learned and my skill sets, and I don't know, just keep moving forward and trying to be a good human, I guess.
No, it's awesome. I appreciate you doing that. And thank you for, taking the time here. You're going to do awesome things in the next years to come.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.